Now on Mississippi Insight.
My sense is that they have done a lot over the last several years, in terms of investments and changes that they've made in the agencies that work on that issue set. Certainly I would argue that the proof at some level is in the pudding.
A deep dive into the 2025 Mississippi legislative session. We ask, what did lawmakers really deliver? That's all ahead this week on Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us for this April 13th edition of Insight. The 2025 Mississippi legislative session concluded with significant developments and unfinished business. Lawmakers passed legislation to phase out the state income tax, reducing the flat rate from 4.4% to 3% by 2030, with potential elimination based on future revenue growth. The sales tax on groceries will decrease from 7% to 5% starting July 1, 2025. To fund infrastructure, a 9-cent increase in the fuel excise tax will be phased in over 3 years. And a new Tier 5 for the public employees retirement system was created for new hires following board recommendations. Despite these achievements, the legislature adjourned without finalizing the state budget, so a special session will be required. Additionally, legislation aimed at expanding education freedom and reforming healthcare regulations did not pass and may be revisited. Russ Latino joins us once again. He is founder and CEO of MagnoliaTribune.com. Russ, welcome back to Insight.
Thanks for having me.
Russ, the session ended without a state budget. What's behind the impasse, and how soon could we see a special session?
Oh, I think at the end of sessions, sometimes you have a little bit of back and forth as bills die and bills live and people get a little upset with each other. I suspect it's not going to end up being very much of a big deal. They will get a budget done between now and the end of the fiscal year. It'll be somewhere around $7.1 billion in general fund spending, which is up considerably from where we were just a few years ago. And within a few months, everybody will be singing Kumbaya again.
Will the budget process be more difficult coming off the passage of that sweeping tax overhaul?
I don't believe so. You got to think about the tax bill as being one that is very gradual. For starters, what happens next year is really what was already planned, which is going from a 4.4% flat rate down to 4%. And so, my full expectations at this point is that it won't have any impact, at least in the immediate term, on the budget process. It's just a matter of getting folks in a room and getting it hammered out.
The governor backed education freedom accounts. That failed to pass. What happened to that proposal?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of people who would like to see school choice passed in Mississippi. It's been passed in Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Alabama. So we're surrounded by a ring of school choice. The lieutenant governor and the Senate have been holdouts on that particular policy. You've seen support from the governor's office. You've seen support from the speaker's office. It really has gotten held up, whether you're talking about allowing kids to transfer public to public school, the Tim Tebow Act, which would have allowed homeschoolers to participate in extracurricular activities died, a charter school expansion bill died, and then any effort to do what are called ESAs, or education scholarships accounts, didn't go anywhere either. I think most people view the Senate as being the impediment there. The question is whether or not they've got the votes and whether or not Lieutenant Governor Huffman wants to lead on that issue.
Were there any surprises in what made it through versus what died in committee this year?
Oh, I'm sure there are if I thought deeply about it, Byron. I think you always have this situation where bills that were thought to be pretty benign and easy to pass die by the wayside just because people run out of time, or maybe in the horse trading somebody gets upset. I think the biggest sort of moment of the session is clearly the passage of the income tax elimination bill and the circumstances around it. But I think overall, if you look at the session, it was a productive session. Obviously, they've got to come back and figure out this budget piece.
Did the legislature do enough this session to address economic growth or workforce development?
Yeah, my sense is that they have done a lot over the last several years, in terms of investments and changes that they've made in the agencies that work on that issue set. Certainly I would argue that the proof at some level is in the pudding. If you look at economic development over the last several years, just Amazon and Compass Data Center alone is $26 billion in new investments in the state, which dwarfs anything that's ever been done in the state. In fact, if you added up all of the other projects in the last 20 or 30 years, they wouldn't equal those two projects announced in the last 12 months. And then certainly there are other signs, right? I mean, wages are growing in Mississippi. In terms of the state GDP, which is the overall economy, Byron, we were the second fastest growing state in the entire country, not just the Southeast, but the entire country in the fourth quarter of 2024. So there's a lot to be excited about or encouraged by in terms of what's going on in Mississippi. I think the legislature's just got to keep doing the hard work and not rest on the laurels, but there's credit to be given.
From a policy standpoint, what issues are most likely to carry over into the next session or be handled in special session?
Yeah, I think there's the potential of something around education choice, whether it's in the special session or next year. I don't think that issue is going away. I think we have seen an issue like Medicaid expansion, which occupied everybody's time and attention last year, largely kind of fizzle out, and some of that has to do with what's going on in Washington. I know the lieutenant governor says he wants to continue working on essentially what is free community college for Mississippians. So there's some issues like that are out there. Mobile sports betting is a big issue where I think you're going to see really kind of a fight between casinos. Some of the bigger casinos that have the technology developed are ready for there to be mobile sports betting. And I think some of the smaller casinos and smaller markets fear that it will cut down on their foot traffic. And so you're going to end up seeing a little bit of a fight over that, I think, next year. I wouldn't be surprised if there are additional fights over alcohol, what we call alcohol freedom bills, right? Do you have the ability to have a bottle of wine shipped to your house? Well, this year, the legislature said yes. Do you have the ability to go into a liquor store or wine store on a Sunday and buy it? That's not something that Mississippi allows right now. And then there are always big questions about, should grocery stores be able to sell those products? And so I think some of those sorts of issues where historically Mississippi is behind the rest of the country and allowing people to have what I would call business freedom could very well be top of mind going into the next session.
And while you're here, let's talk a little bit about the race for the Jackson mayor. Senator John Horhn nearly won the Democratic primary outright with more than 48% of the vote. Incumbent Mayor Chokwe Anchalamumba drew less than 17%, but that's enough for him to join Horhn in an April 22nd runoff. What are your thoughts on this race?
Yeah, if I was Senator Horhn, I'd be really mad at the number of people who qualified to run in that Democratic primary, because he would have shellacked the incumbent, but for the fact that they had that many people with their names in the pot. It's anybody's guess. At some level, you would look at the numbers and say, well, clearly John Horhn's going to win this race. I think that's a mistake to have that point of view. Runoff elections are always squirrely. You got to get your people back out to the polls. You've got to have people convinced that it's important to go to the polls. This is happening right around the time of school getting out and people starting to take vacations. I think if I was a betting man, I would say Horhn is going to win. But it's one of those things that you just got to play the line.
Basically, because this is a special election, the voter turnout is typically fairly low. What do you expect? Do you expect this to be a higher turnout for this special election because of the race, or what do you expect to come on the 22nd?
Yeah, look, I would not be surprised at all if you saw much higher turnout in this special or in this runoff than what you would see in other runoffs. I think there is a highly motivated chunk of Jackson that looks at the current situation in Jackson, whether it's the debacles around the water, the garbage disputes, the fact that roads are crumbling, the fact that there's, rising crime in some ways, and you look at the fact that Jackson's led the nation in homicide. All of those are things that I think at some level, if you were looking at the current administration, you would say, you're not doing enough. I think the other part of that, quite candidly, the elephant in the room is you have a sitting mayor who's under federal indictment for bribery or alleged bribery. And so in those circumstances, I think there are an awful lot of people who are wanting to turn the page. I think the other really important part of that analysis for people who are motivated against the incumbent really is that they're looking at it going, hey, if Jackson's going to turn around, we need state engagement, right? We need the legislature to be more engaged. We need the legislature to make additional investment. That doesn't happen right now because the legislature has no confidence in the current administration in Jackson. And so if the goal is to get additional investment from the state, I think there's got to be a change in that office. I think a lot of people recognize that. Core competence invites confidence, and confidence invites investment. And so I think A lot of people have that mindset.
Let's talk a little bit on the national level with the tariffs and the impact the tariffs are having on the nation. Now we're on a 980 pause. How are Mississippians, what do you think the feeling is for Mississippians when it comes to the tariffs and the 980 pause and the impact on families here?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who don't understand what a tariff is. A tariff is a tax paid by a domestic entity. So our orders, a shipload of televisions from Japan, they get here, the nation of Japan doesn't write a check, Walmart writes. And then they pass that on to people in Mississippi. And so there are three categories that I think you could be affected by this, right? And it's not an immediate impact. It's going to take 6 to 8 weeks for people to really feel the impact of some of this. But you got people who buy things, and for them, if they're buying things that customarily come from China or other countries that these tariffs have been applied to, their prices are going to go up. You've got people who make things. So Mississippi manufacturers, as an example, a third of the component pieces in Mississippi manufacturing come from overseas. Like we order parts and those parts to build something. And so if they're expensive, that means the end product is much more expensive. Left of it, and it can affect job markets. The people affected who sell things overseas, and a great example of this is Mississippi farmers. So Mississippi farmers, Byron, sell about $2.7 billion worth of product overseas. They grow, they're too good at their jobs. And so they grow so much that they've got to sell it overseas. And certainly some of the could be impacted by retaliatory tariffs. China, as an example, is a prolific consumer of soybeans. Soybeans is Mississippi's #1 export. Candidly, that got hurt back in 2018 and 19 with the first trade war, which was much smaller with China. China established some new suppliers out of Brazil. But there are a whole bunch of exporters in Mississippi that could be impacted by this too. Mississippi exports $13.7 billion worth of goods every single year. That's 10% of our state economy. So there's the risk to people who are selling overseas as well.
At the end of the day, how do you think things are going to shake out here? Do you think this is going to settle when the dust settles here? What do you think will be?
It's hard to tell because there's been such a division in goals, right? I think there's been a goal sort of articulated in some circles within the White House of this being a negotiating tool. And I think it could be a very effective negotiating tool. America's the biggest market on the planet, which means people want to sell here. And then there are other people who just want to keep the tariffs because they believe it will produce revenue or will onshore businesses that have left. I think that latter view is pretty naive. So my hope would be that the people like the Secretary Scott Bessent, his point of view wins out, which is that this is an opportunity to negotiate better trade deals with other countries. Assuming that happens, I think there will be short-term pain and then we can get back to some degree of normalcy. If that doesn't happen, there's a very real risk of real inflation, prices going up. There's also a risk of something called stagflation, where prices go up, the economy stagnates, like we go into a recession, which is really the worst of two worlds. I'm not predicting that as a calamity. I'm just saying those are the risks that are on the table if some of these tariffs persist for a very long time.
Russ, Latino, always good talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back. We are just 9 days away from an election showdown between two Jackson leaders. Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba will face State Senator John Horhn on April 22nd in the Democratic primary election runoff. And the incumbent mayor will need a major turnout of supporters if he hopes to beat the longtime senator from Jackson. 12 News' Cameron Smith spoke with voters about this pivotal race.
The official election results reveal Senator John Horhn received more than 12,000 votes, and incumbent Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba received more than 4,000 votes. And voters have mixed reactions to the large lead Senator John Horhn took.
I don't know if a large number of candidates contributed to that in any way, but I was very surprised to see Horhn almost win in the first primary.
The ones who actually got out and voted for who they thought was best. So it's not really surprising. It is surprising that there is a runoff.
Mayor Lumumba received a little more than 9,500 votes in the 2021 primary than he did in the primary that just concluded. Voters say the indictment probably didn't help the mayor in the primary election.
You're innocent until proven guilty, so I don't want to leap to conclusions on the mayor, but I think it certainly had an impact.
The election results also showed that about 26,000 voters showed up to the polls out of a little more than 114,000 registered voters. That's less than 23% of all registered voters.
It's just important because Jackson, needs a change, regardless of who you vote for. Like I stated, it's just I'm not that person to sit around and talk about what's going on in Jackson, but I do want to think that my vote makes a difference.
Quentin Ewell says he'll be voting in the runoff if he can get to the polls. He says there's an inconvenience of how the polls are set up and how long it takes to vote these days.
Having more of an app-based functionality of voting will make it more convenient and have easier access for everybody to vote.
As you watch this on April 13th, we are counting down the hours until 11:59 p.m. local time, Tuesday, April 15th. The tax filing deadline approaches. All state and federal income tax returns and payments are due by that date to avoid late fees or penalties. Tax expert Tony Huffman with Huffman & Company talks with Walt Grayson each week on the Daily Sip. Here's his advice for taxpayers.
Tony, it's as the old saying used to be when you were close to the end of something or something was coming up. We're down to the lick log, I think.
We're there.
Somebody told me that one time, then had to explain what a lick log was.
Yeah, we're not going to do that today.
Okay, no, we don't have time. We're going to talk taxes today. But we are near the filing of taxes, and this is for last year's taxes. But is there anything that can still be done to reduce what we owe for last year, even though it's not last year anymore?
There actually is, and it's there's a couple things, and there are the few things that you can do that actually impact tax year 2024. One, most people know about is an individual retirement account or an IRA, and whether that's a traditional, which is a tax-deductible IRA, or a Roth, which is a non-deductible IRA. Both of those can be funded up until April 15th and impact your 2024 tax return. So if you decide that you want to make an IRA contribution by April the 15th of $7,000 or $8,000, depending on how old you are, that can be deducted on your 2024 tax return. So that's one thing. And then there's HSA, which is a health savings account, that if you're in a high premium deductible health insurance plan, and HSA is a separate account, almost like an IRA, to be honest with you. It's pre-tax, it grows tax-free, and if you use it for qualified medical expenses, it comes out tax-free. And so that's something else that you can fund before April 15th and reduce your 2024 taxes.
Now, let me ask you about that, the health savings account. So what if, though, you've got this health savings account and then you move on to another job or get another medical coverage or something like that? You don't really need it anymore. Can you get the money back?
You can. Well, so an HSA, health savings account, transfers with you. It's your account. And so if you had funded an HSA with an employer and you leave that employer, that money goes with you, stays in your HSA account, and you can continue to use it to pay qualified medical expenses until you use the money up. So, and it doesn't matter that you're not with the same employer. As long as you have the HSA account, you can continue to use it.
Okay. What other little tricks have you got up your sleeve for us today?
Oh,
yeah, I'll check my list too.
Besides the HSA and the IRA, I'd say the next big thing that people need to be thinking about is.
Oh, I know one thing.
You know,
if you owe money.
Oh yeah.
Make sure you get it in by April 15th, or make your arrangements if you're going to file an extension or something.
Well, and I think we're going to talk about extensions next week because I'm going to come in on Monday. And that'll be the day before the filing deadline, and we'll talk about extensions and how to do those. But the other thing that's coming up April 15th are estimated tax payments. So you and I have talked about on and off about sub-S corporations and LLCs and the gig economy and those people who make money that they don't have taxes withheld from. Well, they're required to make quarterly estimated tax payments, and the first one of those is due April 15th, next Tuesday. So if you're making money that doesn't have withholding taxes coming out of it, then Tuesday is a big day for you to write a check to the IRS.
Okay, and then Monday you're back with us because next Wednesday it'll be too late.
Yeah, so Tuesday's the tax day, Monday's the talk about extensions, and Wednesday is I'm not coming in for a while.
Yeah, that's right. You're going to be busy for a while.
Exactly.
Tony, thank you for joining us today. Tony Huffman. There we are, right there. There's your name and everything right there, and your phone number and all that. So, and you'll be back with us next next Monday.
Monday.
We just said this. I just heard that on TV just a second ago. You'd be back Monday, and I forgot that already.
If you have comments or questions about today's show or suggestion for an interview or segment, just drop us a line. Email our producers. The address is news@WJTV.com. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.